A sprawling plantation where ghostly echoes of the past reverberate through abandoned buildings, a famous cemetery roamed by witches and restless spirits, and a cursed road scarred by devil worship, brutal tragedies, and terrifying monsters await on this list of some more of Louisiana's most haunted places. Let's jump right in. Hey guys, and thanks for joining me on this journey through some more of Louisiana's most haunted places. Recognized for its unique culture and history, for its iconic plantations, numerous attractions, and beautiful natural landmarks, the Bayou State also harbors a reputation saturated in voodoo, classic ghost stories, and tales of the otherworldly. Are you sure you're ready for this one? Our first haunt has us traveling northwest of New Orleans to the weathered and iconic Woodland Plantation. The Woodland Plantation, which sits just off of the Mississippi River in Laplace, Louisiana, is a historic plantation home turned museum site that's become a popular destination for history enthusiasts and tourists simply seeking a glimpse into what life was like in the antebellum South. And its defunct bounds are shrouded in a number of scary stories and tales of supernatural phenomena. Historically, lands now holding plantation grounds were, for thousands of years, frequented by tribes native to the region, including the Chitimaca, the Huma, and the Tunica, amongst others, who all utilized the Mississippi as a strong resource for fresh water, travel, fertile soil, and plentiful hunting and fishing opportunities. Ironically, following colonization, wealthy Americans would push out native tribes and relish the life-giving waters of the Mississippi for these very same reasons. And slowly, through the 1700s, plantation homes would begin dotting its banks. Circa 1793, our Woodland Plantation in question was constructed for one Manuel Andre, and by 1810, it had been heavily expanded for new owner Francois Norbert Boudesque. While in its earliest years, the plantation had proved profitable off of the practice of slave labor, in 1811, everything changed. Right on the front porch of Woodland, a group of enslaved individuals met under the cover of night and plotted what is still recognized as the largest slave revolt in American history. As other plantations were close by, this group of individuals rallied as many other slaves as they could, and then marched from plantation to plantation, increasing their numbers as they fought for freedom and for the creation of an envisioned free territory. Sadly, this rebellion was put down in the most brutal of ways, as local militias backed by US military tore through their ranks, killing dozens, posting heads on spits along the Mississippi, and capturing countless others who were later put on trial and presumably to death. Now, while this rebellion failed, it made a massive and sweeping impression in the minds of politicians and enslaved men and women everywhere, and ultimately, it would act as one of the many catalysts laid on a bridge to eventual freedom and emancipation. Following the Civil War, slavery was no longer an option for southern plantations, and much like others around it, Woodland would slowly die off. In more recent times, in 2004, the last of the weathered old site's residents would move out, after which it was turned into a museum site. While this museum is now technically closed, the site is still considered historic museum grounds and welcomes a number of visitors each year. Not really all that surprising when considering its lengthy and quite violent history. The whole of Woodland Plantation grounds are rumored to harbor their fair share of restless spirits, and those who have braved its abandoned buildings have reported instances of doors opening and closing by themselves, disembodied voices and shouts heard from empty areas, and the strong smells of tobacco smoke, perfume, cologne, or cooking foods without source. Easily the most famous tales of terror surrounding Woodland pertain to what else but its legendary slave revolt. As some tell it, the spirits of all the men and women who fought and died for their freedom might still remain, and more horrifying stories detail instances in which visitors have encountered chilling, headless apparitions roaming about, or bloody spits with heads on them near the river that are there one moment and gone in the blink of an eye. Additionally, and especially after dark, several have reported watching full-scale reenactments of the revolt, with men on horseback, screaming, torches, and more, that rages long into the night before fading away into nothingness. Also reported across Woodland bounds are the forms of men and women in period clothing sighted out of the peripheral, disembodied boot steps heard across its old porches, and instances of lights or motion seen within its long dormant buildings. Our second haunt has us dining in the Big Easy itself at the ever-prestigious ARNO's. ARNO's, which is placed in the iconic French Quarter of New Orleans, Louisiana, is a historic restaurant and bar that's grown massively in both fame and popularity amongst locals, tourists, and the like, for its unparalleled and ridiculously delicious Creole-style menu, and that's long touted a reputation amongst the most haunted places in a city that's widely considered one of the United States' haunted capitals. Historically, through the turn of the 20th century, immigrants would arrive to America in waves by way of New York City, and amongst these immigrants was a man by the name of ARNO Cazenave, who, following his arrival, would, in 1902, travel to New Orleans. To make ends meet, ARNO would work as a wine salesman for a time, but as he did so, a passion grew within him, as did a desire to provide the local populace with not just fine vino, but also with delicious foods. And slowly, a vision for a grand restaurant was formed. By 1918, the Frenchman had purchased 2 adjacent buildings in the French Quarter and had opened a large restaurant, being ARNO's, between them. Over subsequent years, ARNO's unparalleled menu and hospitality would grow rapidly in popularity. Sadly, in 1948, ARNO would pass on, and in the wake of his death, his daughter, Germaine Wells, would take over management of his beloved establishment, during which time she would honor and cherish the tradition and dishes created by her late father. Her success was so grand, in fact, that in 1957, Wells was actually recognized by the National Restaurant Association for her superior hospitality. Sadly, however, as the times changed and new restaurants sprouted up across the city, ARNO's, which was still quite old-fashioned in its business dealings, would begin to lose the spotlight and would fall upon hard times. But this is where the Casparians would step in. In 1978, Germaine would sell to husband and wife Archie and Jane Casparian, who cherished the site and who held years of experience in the hospitality and service industries, following which the family would set to work on a slew of repairs, modernizations, and renovations, and would improve the site without altering its original vibe. To fund repairs, the Casparians would actually sell timeshares for tables at the restaurant, which would entail a purchase of $10,000, but that would guarantee shareholders $12,000 worth of food or drink in return, and that their particular tables would always be available within 30 minutes of them calling or checking in. Additionally, the names of all those who purchased these shares and incidentally helped ARNO survive were permanently memorialized on a wall in the restaurant. During the same period, the Casparians would launch new marketing campaigns and would set to work on a modernized menu that would nudge ARNO's back into recognition as one of the most desirable venues in the city. In 1983, Archie and Jane would acquire full ownership of the site, and moving forward, they would continue to operate and cherish the prestigious old establishment. More recently, following the 2005 Hurricane Katrina, ARNO's was actually one of the first restaurants to reopen. As of 2014, the site was run under fourth-generation Casparians, being siblings Katie and Archie, and in 2018, the cherished old haunt would celebrate its centenary. In the present, ARNO's remains open to the public and offers a wide range of delicious dishes coupled with drinks that are positively to die for. Now, unlike many of our other haunts, ghostly activity experienced within ARNO has never actually really been reported as scary, but rather welcoming. And it's believed the old venue may simply host the spirits of those who relished its bounds in lives since past, with both staff and visitors reporting phantom voices calling out long-lost orders, instances of drinks refilling spontaneously and under impossible timeframes, and doors that open inexplicably for guests, as if someone unseen is offering hospitality from beyond the grave. Easily the 2 most famous apparitions at the restaurant are that of Germaine Wells, whose ghost has been known to greet unsuspecting guests and even offer them friendly chatter while they wait, only to disappear in front of their eyes, and of course, the spirit of ARNO himself, who's often sighted watching over the dining room with a smile, and who's been known to remove dishes from the kitchen that don't meet his standards, perform small maintenance tasks across the property, and that's also often mistaken for a living person as he sees guests off into the night, only for them to later realize that they were interacting with someone who's been dead for decades. Our third haunt lands us in northwestern Louisiana, at the infinitely famous Shreveport Municipal Auditorium. The Shreveport Municipal Auditorium, which is situated just out of downtown Shreveport, Louisiana, is a popular music and events venue that's acted as such for around a century. Its bounds are popular for famous and semi-famous music performances, and also infamous for their purported slew of ghostly happenings. Historically, through the 1920s, the auditorium was first designed and constructed in the Art Deco style under architect Samuel Weiner, and would open its doors on November 11th of 1929, under a dedication pertaining to the soldiers of the Great War on Veterans Day. Through its earlier years, the site would be utilized by the US military and would serve as both a barracks and also as a home base from which to launch their experimental early aircraft warning system, or radar. In 1948, a new program called the Hayride was launched on site and would entail the featuring of various talented singers, songwriters, and performers. Eventually, and due to its high reception and featuring of some serious talent, the Hayride would come to be known as the Cradle of the Stars. Notably, a number of high-profile names would grace its stage at this time, and included the likes of Hank Williams, Johnny Cash, Johnny Horton, and many, many others. Oh, and perhaps the most famous of its talents was none other than the king himself, Elvis Presley, who actually started his career right here, with a debut on October 16th of 1954, after which he was signed to a contract to perform every Saturday night for only $18 a show, until he was later discovered by one Colonel Tom Parker, who bought his contract for $10,000. While Elvis eventually went on to much bigger venues and events, the Hayride was undoubtedly the show and place where he honed his now legendary talent. For a time, the Hayride's audience would boom to around 2,000 people per show, until it was nationally broadcast through CBS and later adopted by the Armed Forces radio programming. And though this programming would cease circa 1960, the Hayride would live on and was regularly scheduled through the remainder of the decade. Culturally, the Shreveport Municipal Auditorium stands on another level entirely, and gave way to a number of African-American musicians, including Huddy Leadbelly Ledbetter, James Brown, Aretha Franklin, Bobby Blue Bland, and even B.B. King. In 1991, the site was listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and more recently, in 1997, it was honored as a National Historic Landmark. Impressively, to this day, this aged auditorium totes 3,200 seats alongside its popular Stage of Stars Museum, and puts on a number of concerts, family shows, plays, boxing matches, and much, much more. It remains open into the present and is a popular stop for both locals and those visiting the Shreveport area, with regularly scheduled events offered multiple times each month. Ghost stories surrounding this aged auditorium aren't a new thing, and in its earlier days, the site actually lent its basement out to be used as morgue space. Incidentally, it's believed the spirits of those whose bodies were held within the auditorium might still linger, and those frequenting its bounds have reported objects sighted moving on their own, extreme cold patches felt through the heat of summer, and a disturbing moaning sound that emanates from the basement when it's completely empty. Most famously, spirits matching the descriptions of both Elvis and Johnny Cash have been sighted roaming the building, always in good moods, and seemingly restored to their prime, while others have told of hearing the sounds of applause and the commotions of a large crowd when the site is vacant and even locked up for the night. One more notable spirit in the auditorium is easily that of its Blue Lady. While not much is known about her origins, pretty much since documented history of the site started, an alarming number of reports detail encounters with the ghost of a woman in a blue dress, who's often sighted hurrying or even running through the building, and who always ends up vanishing in the blink of an eye. Also reported across auditorium grounds are doors that open and close inexplicably, disembodied footsteps heard on the stairs, and one account of a tour guide who nearly tumbled down said stairs and was actually caught by an unseen force and placed safely at their foot, and a tall, athletic specter, who's believed to be the ghost of a former boxer who died in a car crash on his way to his own fight, has been known to materialize in various seats when the expanse is empty, with a mournful look on his face. And on to number 4, which takes us back to New Orleans and has us braving its iconic St. Louis Cemetery number 1. St. Louis Cemetery number 1, which is located in New Orleans, Louisiana, is one of the sweeping city's oldest and most famous burying grounds, whose bounds have become popular stops for history buffs and travelers alike, and amongst dark tourists and paranormal investigators for their purported ties to some of the old city's most prolific paranormal activity. Historically, following a massive city fire in 1788, New Orleans' downtown was completely redesigned from the ground up, and in this new design, its earlier burying grounds, being the St. Peter Cemetery, was not conducive to a shared vision for the metro. A year later, in 1789, St. Louis Cemetery number 1 was designed and plotted to replace the former graveyard. The site's earliest burials were likely standard in-ground burials. However, following flooding of various graveyards resulting in bodies literally washing over the city, in 1803, a city ordinance would restrict all future burials to be conducted above ground in crypts, tombs, or vaults. Following the Louisiana Purchase of the same year, and the Haitian Revolution, which raged from 1791 to 1804, New Orleans' demographic changed drastically, and as the city grew, so would its cemetery, eventually reaching right up to the locale's ramparts. Through June of 1832, the New Orleans City Council would decide to extend Kant, Trem, and Basin streets, which would result in St. Louis Cemetery being split up and in graves being moved to new plots. In 1847, the Board of Church Wardens of the St. Louis Cathedral would let go of a portion of its lands for use by the city, resulting in more graves being transferred elsewhere, and over subsequent years, the cemetery would grow into something of an icon. More recently, in 1975, St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 was honored on the National Register of Historic Places, and in 2008, it was listed on the African American Heritage Trail by the state of Louisiana, due in part to its large number of graves that are either historically or culturally significant. Some notable interments on site include first mayor of New Orleans and the creator of the sugar industry, Etienne de Boer, Homer Plessy of the infinitely famous Plessy vs. Ferguson case, first African-American mayor of New Orleans, Ernest N. Dutch Morial, Creole author and educator Alexander Dimitri, and so many more. In the present, while cemetery grounds aren't open to the public, they are for guided tours. And over the years, a handful of local youth and daredevils have sneaked in, especially after dark, and usually due to the property's reputation as one of the most haunted graveyards not just in the state, but in the world. Chillingly, those who have entered the cemetery on tours or that have jumped the fence, especially after dark, have reported a host of supernatural happenings, including orbs that float above the graves, instances of personal electronics going haywire, and both silhouettes and fully formed figures captured in photography and video. One of the cemetery's most perplexing hauntings is that of a ghost dubbed Alphonse. While for years, investigators who have tried to uncover his story have been met in failure, his actions have resulted in several fairly solid theories. Most commonly, Alphonse has been known to appear to visitors, hold their hands, and ask for them to take him home. And when viewed from a distance, many have described him as picking up flowers from other graves and dropping them off on his own grave. For this reason, it's believed he maybe died of unnatural causes, and that his spirit is seeking justice in the afterlife. Incidentally, the standing theory is that he was murdered by a member of the Peonid family, as he's also been known to tell people to stay away from their tomb. Another popular St. Louis cemetery story tells of Henry Vignier. In life, Henry lived as a nomad until he was accepted into a boarding house in New Orleans. During his time there, it's said that he kept important paperwork pertaining to his family and their tomb within the graveyard, and that at some point, he asked the owner of the boarding house to keep a close watch over his belongings while he was away at sea. Sadly, it's said the greedy owner ended up selling off rights to his family plot, and following his return, Henry quickly fell ill and passed on shortly after, resulting in his burial in an unmarked grave somewhere amongst the more prominent tombs. To this day, countless reports detail encounters with a man with piercing blue eyes that often screams, "I need rest," in frustration, and it's been known to ask the living for directions to the Vignier tomb. Finally, easily the most famous story surrounding St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 ties itself to the legendary voodoo queen of New Orleans, Marie Laveau. In life, Marie was a midwife and hairdresser who was well loved amongst the community, but she was also known for another talent, being a strong affinity for voodoo, the occult, and natural remedies. Now, while many sought her out for her standard practices, others implored her assistance through the use of her strong magic, with issues such as relationship woes, financial troubles, illness, and more. Following her passing in 1881 at the age of 80, a lavish funeral with countless townspeople was held. However, after her death, her spirit started showing up all over town. Today, it's believed this spirit lingers within her tomb, and as the story goes, X's on its stones represent people who requested help from Marie from beyond the grave. It's told that if one marks their own X on her tomb, turns around 3 times, knocks on the stone, and then yells out their wish, that, if they're true believers, Marie will grant said wish. And while she's usually depicted in a positive light, some tell that Marie's ghost can get quite angry over non-believers and those who see her as a gimmick. And on several occasions, she's been known to manifest as a terrifying wraith-like witch that flies through the skies above, chasing the living, and even sometimes leaving scratches, bruises, or other injuries. Saving the spookiest for last, our 5th and final haunt takes us to Louisiana's capital city and on a drive down the infamous Frenchtown Road. Frenchtown Road, which is placed out of Baton Rouge in Louisiana, is an unassuming forest drive cutting through the heart of the countryside that's frequented by those driving between rural communities just east of the city, and that, over its many years, has grown in infamy as a place where the supernatural lurks, and as a stage for countless urban legends. Historically, and for thousands of years, tribes native to the region would inhabit lands now holding Louisiana's capital city, including members of the Huma, Bayagula, and Acolapisa, who would utilize the area as a thriving environment for settlement, hunting, fishing, fresh water, and other resources. Following the arrival of Europeans to America in 1492, over subsequent decades, they would slowly expand west across America. And in 1699, French explorers would document the discovery of the Baton Rouge area, with Pierre Le Moyne d'Iberville referring to the area as Istruma, or in English, Red Stick, due to a series of large red poles left by the tribes that bore atop them fish, bear heads, and other sacrifices. Today, it's believed the placement of these markers actually acted as a boundary between the Bayagula lands and Huma tribes. In 1718, a French fort was constructed in the area to protect travelers, traders, and hunters. And following the Treaty of Paris in 1763, Baton Rouge lands were transferred from France to England, after which the city would be renamed as New Richmond. Through September of 1779, and on Bayou Manchac, the Spanish would defeat the English at Fort Butte and would capture Baton Rouge. And by 1781, the entirety of West Florida up to and including the city would fall under Spanish rule. In 1810, when local settlers overthrew the Spanish, Baton Rouge was documented with a populace of around 1,000 residents. And at the time, the area would call itself the West Florida Republic and would declare itself independent from other politics. This wouldn't last long, however, and over the following months, Baton Rouge would be annexed by Louisiana and was divided, resulting in the formation of the East Baton Rouge Parish. In 1812, Louisiana was admitted to the Union. In 1817, Baton Rouge was formally incorporated, and in 1849, it was designated the state capital city. Through the Civil War, from 1861 to 1865, Baton Rouge itself would remain under Union control aside from a brief period in 1862. And while the capital itself was moved around a handful of times, in 1882, the center of state government would be returned to the city, which, at the time, totaled a populace of just over 7,000 residents. Through the turn of the 20th century, industry would sweep the region, and Baton Rouge, being located on a prominent bluff on the Mississippi just north of the Gulf of Mexico, would act as an important and strategic port city. As of today, this old city has been expanded to around 75 square miles, with a population of just under 230,000, while the total populace of the East Baton Rouge Parish sits at around 413,000 and stretches 472.1 square miles. Now, if one takes a short drive to the east into the countryside surrounding Baton Rouge, they may just stumble upon Frenchtown Road. Historically speaking, Frenchtown Road was established through the 19th century and possibly even earlier, and for years would act as an important route from Baton Rouge to surrounding rural areas. Incidentally, as this area was modernized, its route actually synergized with urban development, resulting in it being paved over and utilized to this very day. And though it may seem a serene countryside drive, according to local legends, braving a trip down Frenchtown may just be anything but, and those traveling the stretch have experienced a ridiculous array of frightening paranormal activity. First and foremost, phenomena along Frenchtown is often attributed to dark magic, and as it's told, the whole of this stretch plays home to cult activity and satanic worship, with stories of sightings of hooded figures, ritual sites, mutilated animals, and even instances of people who are stopped along it being taken from their vehicles by Satanists and whisked away to God knows where. One particular hotspot for supernatural occurrences is the road's old railroad tracks, which run along it at several points, and even cross over it by way of an old, dilapidated bridge. As one story goes, long ago, a train full of passengers derailed right near the bridge, killing everyone on board. And to date, some tell you can still hear a ghostly train whistle in the distance, followed shortly afterwards by screaming and a loud boom. A second story, which actually sounds a lot like another railroad crossing we've covered recently, tells of a school bus full of children that got stuck on the tracks and that was hit by a train, resulting in the deaths of all of its passengers. Now, some tell that if you park near the tracks and turn off your lights, that small bloody handprints will begin appearing across the windows. A third and final story tells that aforementioned cults utilize the bridge portion of the tracks for rituals, and on several occasions, bloodied animal carcasses, bones, and strange wooden trinkets have been discovered hanging from the crossing. All along Frenchtown Road, travelers have also reported unexplained lights that drift through the tree line, creepy, inexplicable whispers that float on the winds, and shadowy figures that dart about, while others describe feeling a constant sense of dread that doesn't dissipate until they leave the area. Additionally, informal investigations of the drive have yielded high EMF levels, disturbing EVPs that include strange chanting, and hits on thermal grids and communicative devices such as Ouija boards and spirit boxes. But it's not just the road itself that harbors paranormal activity, and throughout its various abandoned structures, lights have been sighted in the middle of the night. Strange forms have been viewed wandering various properties, and some claim that cultists and much darker gatherings may still be held within. Lastly, the woodlands surrounding the road are told to play home to a range of monsters and cryptids from native lore, and some more prolific encounters include dogmen, goat-like demons, rougarou, skunk ape, and some things beyond classification. Thanks for joining me on this adventure through some more of Louisiana's most haunted places. If you enjoyed hearing my histories and ghost stories, subscribe to my channel, throw this upload a like, and share me with anyone you feel could use a good scare. I'll see you all next time, and stay spooky.